He works on school buses, my future son-in-law announced to his parents over the speakerphone, like he was revealing a medical condition. It's not really the image we want for the wedding. The line went quiet for a beat. Then his mother chuckled softly, the kind of laugh people use when they've already decided you don't belong. I stood in my kitchen, grease still under my nails from replacing a brake line, listening to my daughter try to smooth it over. But the invitation had already arrived, a shimmering ivory card for a glass pavilion rooftop ceremony at Val Tower. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering, wondering if they'd notice me more as a valet than as the father of the bride. Before we get into what happened next, if you're here for the first time, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Dallas, New York, out in the country? I love hearing your stories too. My name's Eli Harper, and that morning I just dropped my coffee tin of wedding savings, every spare dollar from years of tune-ups, onto the table when the mail came. The tin rattled like loose bolts against the formica, and next to it sat the star map locket I'd been saving for Lila since she was 12. That's how the day started. The smell of motor oil, the glow of a skyline invitation, and the uneasy thought that maybe I'd be spending her big day somewhere in the shadows, instead of by her side. By the time the rehearsal dinner rolled around, I'd convinced myself that maybe I'd imagined the distance in Preston's voice. Maybe it was just pre-wedding stress. I even put on my best pressed shirt and the jacket Lila bought me for her college graduation. The valet took my old Ford with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and I followed the sound of laughter into the Vale Tower's private dining room, crystal glasses glowing under pendant lights, linen napkins folded into little crowns. Lila's face lit up when she saw me, but before I could even cross the room, Preston intercepted me with a hand on my shoulder, firm enough to steer me sideways. "Eli, can we talk?" he murmured, already guiding me toward a service hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and roasted duck. I noticed the wedding planner waiting there, a laminated seating chart in her hands. Preston cleared his throat, his voice dropping into that careful tone people use when they're about to insult you, but want it to sound like logistics. "About tomorrow, we've decided to keep the family section tight. Optics, you know? With the mayor and a couple of big donors coming, we need to keep things, well, elevated." The planner slid a plastic badge toward me, the word vendor in bold black letters, like she was passing over a parking ticket. "You can still be part of things," Preston added. "Maybe help the valet crew, keep an eye on the classic cars. It's still an important role." My ears rang with the quiet humiliation of it. I looked past him toward the dining room where my daughter was laughing with her bridesmaids, oblivious to the fact that her own father had just been demoted to hired help at her wedding. My fingers curled around the star map locket in my pocket, the metal warm from my hand. Every instinct screamed to walk out, to tell him exactly what I thought of his optics. But I forced a breath, swallowed it down, and nodded once. "If that's what you want." The words tasted like rust. I walked back through the kitchen instead of the dining room, past silver trays of lobster tails and waiters in matching black aprons, my jacket suddenly too tight across the shoulders, knowing I'd just been written out of one of the most important days of my life. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black vendor badge and Preston's polite little smirk. By 5 a.m., I was back in my garage, the hum of the fluorescent light overhead mixing with the tick of the space heater. The coffee tin sat on my workbench, the lid off, quarters and crumpled bills spilling out like the wreckage of a plan that had been years in the making. I kept thinking about that locket, about Lila walking down an aisle I wasn't allowed to sit beside. That's when Maria Ortiz popped into my head. She ran the catering company for half the big events in Dallas. 10 years ago, I'd pulled her off I-30 when her van's radiator gave out, loaned her my tools, and didn't charge a dime. I found her number still taped to the inside of my locker at the bus depot and called. She picked up on the second ring. "Eli, you're up early." I told her everything. The badge, the so-called optics, how I'd do anything just to be there for Lila. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've got a full crew tomorrow at Vale Tower, but I could put you in a busser's vest. You'd be in and out of the main room all night. Nobody questions the catering staff. My chest eased for the first time since that hallway. "I'll take it," I said. By noon, I was at her warehouse helping load silver racks and warming trays into the truck. That's when Deshawn, the Vale Towers building engineer, stopped by for a coffee and spotted me. "Man, you're working the wedding?" he asked, eyebrows climbing. I explained, and he shook his head. "Storm's coming in tomorrow. Backup generator's on its last legs. You see anything flicker, you get me on the radio." He didn't know it, but I could read the electrical schematics for that building in my sleep. Back before the bus depot, I'd been an apprentice systems tech. I didn't tell him that part. Some things are better kept quiet until they're needed. That night, as I hung the busser's vest by my door, it didn't feel like a uniform. It felt like a ticket. Maybe not to the seat I deserved, but to the place I belonged, where my daughter could still look out across that crowded room and see me standing, even if no one else did. By the time Maria's truck pulled into the Vale Tower loading dock the next afternoon, the sky over Dallas was already bruising to a deep gray. Wind funneled between the high rises, rattling the aluminum trays as we unloaded. I slipped into my busser's vest, adjusted the cap low over my brow, and joined the line of staff moving carts toward the freight elevator. We were halfway through setting the head table when I felt the temperature in the room drop. Preston had spotted me. He strode across the polished marble like a man about to eject an unruly guest from his own club. "Maria," he said, voice tight, "we have a problem." She didn't even look up from the seating chart. "We're on schedule." His eyes flicked to me. "Not with him here. I told you." Maria cut him off. "He's my crew. If you don't like it, find another caterer. Today." His jaw flexed, but he stepped back, pulling out his phone as he walked away. 10 minutes later, building security approached with that same laminated badge I'd seen before. "Access denied," stamped in red. "Orders from the client," one of them muttered. Maria waved them off, citing her contract, but the message was clear. Preston was pulling every string he had. Over the radio, I caught Deshawn's voice. "We got elevator 2 stuck between floors. Could be the storm, winds hitting the lines hard." A flash lit the skylights, followed by a low rumble that made the chandelier sway. I slipped into the service corridor, running a hand along the cinder block wall until I reached the mechanical room door. The keypad blinked crimson at my badge. "Access denied." I pressed my ear to the metal. The generator's idle was uneven, like a heart skipping beats. Back in the ballroom, I caught Preston watching me from the corner. Phone still in hand, lips curling into the kind of smile you give when you think you've locked the last door. The air was electric, not just from the storm, but from the tightening noose of his control. Every instinct told me the night wasn't just going to be about serving food anymore. It was about being ready for whatever failed first. The lights, the elevators, or Preston's patience. The first blackout hit just as the cake knife touched the fondant. 1 second the ballroom was all golden light and polite applause. The next it was swallowed in black, with only the sound of the storm hammering the glass above. Gasps rippled through the guests, phones lit up like scattered fireflies, and somewhere in the dark a child started crying. Over the radio, Deshawn's voice cracked with urgency. "Generator's dead. Elevator 3's stuck. 2 kids inside." I didn't wait for permission. I ducked past the dessert table, through the swinging kitchen doors, and into the emergency stairwell, my phone's flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. By the time I reached the mechanical room, the smell of burnt wiring hit me. The control panel's screen was dead, but I knew this setup. It was almost identical to the system I'd worked on back in my apprentice days. I tore a length of foil from a catering tray, stripped the ends of a pair of wires, and bridged a failing circuit, praying the makeshift fix would hold long enough to get those kids out. The hum of the backup kicked in, weak but alive. I raced to the elevator shaft, pried the doors open with a crowbar, and found the ring bearer and flower girl huddled inside, their small faces lit by the glow of my headlamp. "It's okay," I said, lifting them one by one onto the landing. By the time we emerged into the ballroom, the guests had gathered near the windows, their faces pale in the lightning flashes. That's when a voice rang out from the crowd. "Eli Harper?" I turned to see Dr. Alondra Reeves, former NASA flight director, standing with the mayor. Her eyes were wide, a smile breaking through her shock. This man, she said, turning to the guests, wrote the Harper Abort Protocol in '98, the emergency procedure that saved 3 astronauts during the White Sands test. You're alive today because of him. The murmurs swelled into stunned silence, then into scattered applause. Preston's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble. All those hours he'd spent trying to make me invisible, and here I was, the center of the room, without even trying. Lila's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening, not with shame, but pride so fierce it cut through the dark brighter than any spotlight. I just stood there, kids still clutching my arms, the storm roaring outside, feeling the weight of the moment settle on everyone. The waiter, the father, the man they thought they could write out, standing exactly where he belonged. The applause didn't fade. It gathered, like the wind outside, swelling until it filled every corner of that glass pavilion. Guests who hadn't looked me in the eye all night were suddenly stepping forward, shaking my hand, patting my shoulder, telling me where they were when they'd first heard about the White Sands incident. News cameras, there to film the mayor's toast, swiveled toward me, catching the moment I knelt to hand the flower girl back to her mother. In the background, I saw Preston talking to his father, his mouth moving fast, the PR smile gone. Maria caught my eye and tipped her head toward the kitchen, mouthing, "You good?" I was, better than I'd been in years. But Preston wasn't done. He approached with that same rehearsed composure, only now his voice trembled at the edges. "Eli, I owe you an apology," he said, loud enough for those around us to hear. "I judged you by what you do now instead of what you've done, and more importantly, by who you are. That was wrong." His Adam's apple bobbed. "If you're willing, I'd like us to start over, as family." I let the words hang between us. The man who'd spent weeks locking me out was now holding the door wide open. "Family," I said, "isn't about invitations or optics. It's about showing up. You're learning that now." I didn't smile, but I shook his hand because Lila was watching, tears shining in her eyes. Later, the safety inspector cornered Preston about the failed generator, reminding him that his network didn't extend to city code violations. Maria kept her full payment, plus a written apology, and Deshawn's name went into the official report as the on-site lead, my request. As for me, I stayed for the rest of the evening, not at the edge of the room, but right beside my daughter. When the band announced the father-daughter dance, Lila walked past Preston straight to me, locket in her hand. "You were always going to be here," she whispered. And in that moment, I knew the badge, the humiliation, the storm, every bit of it had been worth the price to stand in the light where she could see me. The next morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving Dallas washed clean under a pale gold sunrise. I was back at the bus depot, the smell of diesel and coffee curling together in the cold air, when Lila's car pulled up. She stepped out in jeans and a hoodie, hair pulled back, no veil, no makeup, just my little girl again. She handed me a paper bag with 2 breakfast tacos and the locket I'd given her at the reception. "Figured we'd eat together before the honeymoon," she said. We sat on the hood of my truck, steam rising from our coffee cups, watching the buses roll out. She told me Preston had agreed to family counseling, and that his parents, reluctantly, had invited us both for dinner when they got back. I didn't say I'd think about it, I just nodded, because sometimes forgiveness isn't a grand speech, it's a quiet decision you make over eggs and salsa. That week, Dr. Reeves called to offer me a consulting role for a new aerospace safety program. I told her I wasn't looking for a new career, but I'd be glad to mentor the high school STEM kids who toured the depot every spring. She laughed and said, "Of course you would." And so life went on, not in spotlights, not in headlines, but in the steady rhythm I knew best, fixing what was broken, showing up when it counted, teaching others to do the same. I kept the vendor badge, tucked in the same coffee tin that had once held my wedding savings, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof that sometimes the way in isn't the way you planned, and that being underestimated can be the best disguise you'll ever wear. If this whole thing taught me anything, it's that your worth isn't decided in a boardroom or a ballroom. It's proven in the moments you choose to stand up, even if no one's looking, especially then. And maybe, just maybe, the people who once tried to keep you out will learn that the ones they tried to erase are often the ones they needed most. At its heart, this story is about the quiet, steady kind of strength that doesn't need applause to be real. It reminds us that our value isn't dictated by our job title, our bank account, or whether we fit neatly into someone else's idea of acceptable. Real worth is measured in the choices we make when it's hardest, showing up for the people we love, standing our ground with dignity, and refusing to let anyone erase us from the moments that matter most. It's also a reminder that silence in the face of injustice can be as harmful as the insult itself, and that sometimes the only way to reclaim your place is to walk through the door they tried to close on you, head held high, even if you have to do it in a busser's vest. For a mature audience, the lesson runs deeper. People can change when faced with the truth, but it often takes a crack in their certainty to let the light in. Forgiveness, when it comes, is a choice made for your own peace, not to excuse the harm. And dignity is keeping your self-respect intact, no matter how someone else tries to frame your story. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated or pushed aside, only to prove your worth in an unexpected way? Share your experiences in the comments. Hit like to show support for stories that shine a light on resilience, and subscribe so you don't miss more dramatic, thought-provoking tales. Until next time, may you always find calm after the storm and the courage to stand in your own light.